Welcome back to the deep dive. This is it, the final part of our journey, where we connect centuries of history in Pünderich to the world of today.
It really is the culmination. We've looked at so much archival material, but today is about how that deep past informs the living present.
Right, how a community sustains its identity through some of the most rapid decades of change we've ever seen, from the late 80s right up to now.
And it's a story that is fundamentally framed by the community's, let's call it historical DNA. This isn't passive survival, it's active, deliberate adaptation.
And for you, the listener, what makes this so powerful is the source material we have. We're not just looking at high-level summaries.
No, not at all. We're drawing from this incredibly rich, intensely local archive. Family chronicles, community records, personal notes.
The kind of human detail you so rarely get to see.
And what's really the backbone of this whole story, the thing that lets us connect the dots, is the continuity of certain family lines.
Names that we've seen pop up again and again.
Exactly. Names like Schneiders, Simonis, Holton, Schurker, these aren't just footnotes in a history book. They are the people who are wine growers, carpenters, and, crucially, the very ones compiling and carrying this history forward.
They're the living data points.
They are. They ensure the story actually persists.
So if those families are the thread, what's the fabric they're weaving? We're going to trace that community spirit through really three huge challenges. First, that timeless struggle against nature. Then, the kind of strategic, economic, and social reinvention they undertook.
A massive communal effort.
And finally, and this is the key to our finale, how they secured all that cultural memory for the digital future. So, okay, let's dig in.
Let's start with the most dominant force in Pünderich's story, the Moselle River itself.
It's everything to them, isn't it? The lifeblood and the existential threat all at once.
It truly is. It feeds the vineyards that give them their identity, but it also threatens to wash it all away. We often think about modern floods, the ones in recent memory.
The big one in '93.
Right. But the source material just constantly reminds us that this challenge is, well, it's perennial. It's ancient.
That's such a key insight. You look at the old records and you realize this isn't about some new climate phenomenon. Pünderich has always been in this constant negotiation with the river's power.
Always. You just have to look at the accounts of the severe winters and the ice hazards. In 1830, for example, the Moselle had what they called an ice gang.
What exactly is that? It sounds dramatic.
It is. It's a terrifying surge where massive ice flows get pushed up by the current and pile up along the banks. The records say Mauerhoch.
Wall high.
Wall high. Imagine ice stacked as high as a house. It's an image of nature just completely overwhelming everything man-made.
And that wasn't a one-off event, I take it? This was a recurring problem.
It was a recurring nightmare, and it shaped everything, especially commerce. There was another severe ice hazard in 1892, stretching into 93.
And what did that do to the economy?
It completely paralyzed it. It hindered the navigation of towboats. And you have to remember, the river was the main artery for trade. So ice on the river wasn't just a threat to your cellar, it was a threat to your entire livelihood.
It's an economic chokehold.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And the records have these moments of just, well, genuine strangeness. In 1845, after a really brutal winter, they were still seeing ice flows floating down the Moselle in June.
In June. Ice flows in June. That just reframes your whole understanding of climate instability, doesn't it? We think of it as our problem, but they were living with it in a very visceral way.
And if we pull the lens back even further, the environmental threats weren't always even local. The sources talk about the catastrophic years of 1783 and 1784.
What was happening then?
These weren't just bad harvests. They were years of bizarre weather anomalies, of air turbidity across all of Europe. We now know it was from the Loki volcanic fissure eruption in Iceland.
So Pünderich's identity is forged in dealing with global-scale environmental crises, not just a flooding river.
Exactly. And then, on top of that constant pressure from nature, you add the horror of human conflict. The Second World War tested their resilience to its absolute limit.
Especially in those final brutal months of the war.
We have incredibly specific documentation about a bomb attack on the Pünderich district. It was December 30th, 1944.
And it was devastating.
It was. The Leo Blum house was just gone, completely destroyed. Clemens Bush house, about 70% damage. But the detail that really stays with you.
The unexploded bomb.
Yes. The house of the widow Anna Endries. It was reduced to a ruin. and buried in the cellar was an unexploded bomb.
So even after the attack, the danger is still physically there, buried in the rubble of their homes. The level of collective trauma I can't even imagine.
And it necessitated this huge, immediate collective response just to keep going. The rebuilding efforts were both physical and spiritual.
How so?
A beautiful example is this large crucifix they built right after the war as a memorial. The corpus was copper, provided by the priest, far a grave.
And the cross itself?
The cross was made by the local carpenter, Shriner Edmund Simonis.
There's that name again, Simonis. So you have a continuous family line directly involved in the act of healing and memorializing the trauma.
It's a perfect illustration of that continuity.
That communal response, that need to rebuild not just houses but also meaning, brings us right to the big post-war economic overhaul.
The Flurberinigo.
The vineyard consolidation, probably the most complex, organized effort they ever undertook.
It was born of absolute necessity. By the 1950s, it was painfully clear that the old way of doing things just couldn't survive. About a third of the vineyards had been destroyed in the fighting.
And the ones that were left were just too small, too fragmented for modern agriculture.
Exactly. When you hear small scale, you have to understand what that meant. You had 200 wine growers, and on average, each one owned about 4,000 square meters of land.
That's barely an acre. It's like a large suburban backyard today.
And it wasn't even in one piece. It was scattered in tiny parcels. You couldn't get a tractor in there. You couldn't modernize. It was impossible.
So what did they do? They had to organize.
They did. In 1956, led by people like Joseph Engel, they put together this massive communal petition to the government, asking for an expansion of 21 hectares of vineyard land.
So this was more than just repairs. This was, it was radical social and economic engineering of their whole landscape.
It was monumental. The project kicked off in the late 1950s, and the scale of the civil engineering is just staggering to think about today.
Give us a sense of it.
They built 14.5 kilometers of roads. Over 3 kilometers of that was asphalted. They laid extensive new drainage systems.
For a small village, that's a gigantic public works project. But that level of change, of consolidation, it must have created some friction, right? Families giving up ancestral plots for the greater good.
That's a great question. The records focus on the success, of course. But you have to imagine the immense political will it took. The economic reality was just so stark, they knew they would fail without it.
The consensus must have been overwhelming.
It had to be. And the key is in the details, the logistics of it. They used 21,188 cubic meters of slate.
21,000 cubic meters.
Hauled specifically from the weir in Anchorage, just for the roadbeds and infill.
Just stop and think about the man-hours for that. The coordination to quarry, transport, and lay that much slate. That detail tells you everything. Resilience isn't just about individual grit.
Not at all.
It's about the ability to organize large-scale, professionalized labor over a period of years.
Precisely. And that commitment was secured by leaders like the notary, V.A. Dom, the finance minister, V.A. Hoffman, and the local cashier, Herr Hulten. There's another one of those key family names.
Hulten, right.
They all understood that to survive, Pünderich had to professionalize its communal effort, which, moves us perfectly into our second big theme.
Right, how that professionalization extended beyond the vineyards to the village's image, its community life, its whole identity.
This is where they really start to actively polish their image. Think of the "Our Village Should Be More Beautiful" competitions. This wasn't just about planting flowers.
No, it was strategic. And the clearest sign of that professional organization is the history of their associations, the Verein.
They are the organizational backbone. They've been there forever. The oldest one we can trace is the Male Singing Association, Borussia, 1863.
And their founding photo is still around. It's a touchstone, isn't it? Nearly 160 years of continuity.
It is. And you can see their organizational power early on. In 1873, they hosted a Singerfest, a song festival.
And this wasn't just a small local get-together.
No, this was a regional event. 14 different singing clubs came. For a village of Pünderich's size in the 1870s to pull that off.
The logistics, the planning, the catering, it shows a high level of organization was already in their DNA.
It does. And that tradition didn't just stay static, it evolved. In 1962, they founded the Pünderich Music Association, which is now the Windsor Capelle.
The Wine Growers Orchestra.
Exactly. The instruments change, the name adapts, but that core function of music binding the community together, that remains constant.
And what about the next generation? How did they start modernizing the idea of communal space?
The Youth Club, the JCP, founded in 1976, is a fantastic marker for that.
Yeah.
They were crucial. They brought in new forms of entertainment.
Big events, right.
Huge events. They hosted a BAP concert, and they were clever. They used the existing infrastructure, like the old Turn Hall, for things like film screenings. At one point, nearly 1,500 people came to those.
So they were this engine making sure the village stayed socially relevant for young people.
Which leads you directly to the biggest physical investment in that communal future, which came in the late 80s.
The multi-purpose hall, the Martefakala.
Yes. And this was not some cosmetic upgrade. This was a major strategic investment in the future of their community life. Contracts awarded in '88, dedicated in April '89.
And the cost was significant.
The total investment was over 386,000 Deutschmarks.
That is a staggering amount for a small community in the late 80s. What did that signal? Why was it so important?
It signaled that they valued their ability to gather. They knew the football club, the VfL Pünderich, which had some early success in the 50s, needed modern facilities. But it was more than that. The hall was seen as essential infrastructure for life.
Not just a luxury.
Not at all. It was a statement that said, we are investing in our ability to be a community for the next generation.
Now let's pivot from that social infrastructure to the infrastructure of commerce and trust, the Ike House.
The barrel calibration office. It's such a unique and powerful symbol of their commitment to reliable trade.
Which is the foundation of the whole wine economy.
It is. This was a formal office established way back in 1877 with an official number and everything. The stone building is still there in Duppelstrasse, a testament to meticulous, honest work.
And explain for us why this was so necessary all the way up until 1981. You'd think a barrel is a barrel, its size wouldn't change.
But it did. And that's the key detail modern bottling has made us forget. The volume of a wooden barrel was constantly in flux. 2 reasons. Inside, a buildup of wine tartar would slowly reduce the volume. And outside, the wooden hoops had to be regularly maintained and tightened, what they called nischiken, which also slightly changed the barrel's internal size.
So accuracy was always slipping, and in a business based on volume, that's a huge problem.
A huge problem. So the Ike House was essential for maintaining commercial trust.
And what did that calibration process actually look like?
It was a very physical, painstaking process. They'd roll the barrel in, fill it with water from a kettle through a hose. The calibrator, the fathicher, used this special large float on a thin wire, which was connected to a precise counting mechanism.
And he'd measure it right to the drop.
Exactly. When the water level hit the bottom edge of the bunghole, he'd read the exact volume. It ensured that when you sold a feuder of wine, the buyer was actually getting a feuder.
And just to remind everyone, a feuder is a massive amount of wine.
It is. Roughly 1,000 liters, enough for about 1,300 bottles. So that century-long process of hyper-accurate measurement shows you how deeply professionalized they were.
Speaking of necessities tied to the river, let's talk about the ferry, the pont.
A vital link. It's easy to forget that before the mid-19th century, there were almost no stone bridges. Ferries were essential.
Especially for the wine growers.
Right, because their plots were often on the other side of the river. We know Pünderich had a formal contract with a ferryman, a furger, as early as 1808.
And what did that contract demand?
It was for 6 years of service, and it specifically required him to have a boat large enough to carry a full feuder of wine, that 1,000-liter capacity.
So again, it all comes back to the wine economy. The infrastructure existed to serve the wine.
The need was continuous. Today, the ferry is more for tourism, but its existence is rooted in centuries of economic necessity.
That organized spirit is so clear. But resilience isn't just about infrastructure. It's also about mental and cultural survival.
The ability to face disaster with a shared perspective.
Which brings us to Carnival, to humor as a form of resilience.
The founding of the Carnival Association, the KVP Pünderischer Gesetzkramer, in 1990 is a really critical piece of the modern puzzle. Figures like Dieter Jeschke and Alfred Feiden were central to that.
And what role does it play?
It's a vital social outlet, a necessary pressure valve against the hardship and the routine of life in the valley. Humor is a system stabilizer.
But right out of the gate, their very first big event was canceled.
A perfect, poignant example of how local life is connected to global events. Their first major session in 1991 was called off because of the Gulf War.
So the community collectively decided to pause its biggest celebration.
They did, out of respect for what was happening in the world. And the source notes, interestingly, that apparently only the U.S. forces on their bases continued to celebrate.
Which really highlights the depth of the local commitment to the tradition, and to people like Albert Schescher, the wagon builder, who kept that spirit alive even when it was paused.
He and others ensured it wasn't forgotten, just waiting for the right time to return.
Okay, let's pull the lens way back now. We've talked about the post-war era, but let's get into the deep history of identity, of that fundamental choice that defined Pünderich for centuries.
The choice of whether to stay or to leave.
Exactly. The history of emigration. Because to understand the resilience of those who stayed, you have to understand the immense pressure on those who left.
It's a crucial part of the story.
Yeah.
In the 19th century, the economic pressure was just relentless.
Yeah.
Immigration wasn't about seeking opportunity so much as it was about escaping desperation.
And the records are just chillingly clear about that desperation. There's that quote from the carpenter Klein he wrote to the Prussian authorities.
And he said he couldn't feed his wife and 8 children. He admitted he was tempted, in Oyster not, in extreme need, to resort to illegal means just to survive.
That's the kind of poverty that drives people across an ocean.
It drove them toward what was advertised as the Traumland America, the Promised Land. It offered things they could never have at home: land ownership, freedom from taxes.
But the reality was often a complete betrayal of that promise.
A tragic betrayal. The sources are clear that many did not find happiness. They mentioned 407 immigrants between 1825 and 1913 who were swindled by agents, ended up in poorhouses, or were even shipped off to places like Algeria.
The dream was often a fabrication.
Let's look at one of the most extreme documented journeys we have. A family heading to São Leopoldo, Brazil. They arrived in March 1829.
And just the timeline of the journey itself is staggering.
It is. First, 4 weeks of overland travel just to get to the port in Bremen. Then they had to wait there.
For how long?
13 weeks.
13 weeks just waiting in a port city, having already left home. The mental fortitude that must have taken.
Unimaginable. And they boarded the ship, the Olbers. The transatlantic voyage took 82 days. And on that voyage, 47 of the 800 passengers died.
And that wasn't even the end of it.
No. Then came more local ship travel. You're talking about 9 months of terrifying, uncertain, and dangerous travel from the moment they left home.
And they landed in what the record calls a far foreign, large, and still half-wild land.
Right into the primeval forest. And the records are honest about the hardship. The father and one daughter were sick with fever for 13 weeks. They spent 10 months just enduring sickness.
But eventually, they did find success.
Eventually, yes. After about a year, they built a proper house. They got government subsidies, which were critical, and that allowed them to buy livestock.
What did they manage to acquire?
2 cows, 2 riding horses, 20 pigs, over 100 chickens. They were farming successfully. They even harvested tobacco, which they proudly wrote home was better than German tobacco. They had made it.
And they sent greetings back home to specific people. Nicholas Schmitz, Caspar Kahlfeldts. It makes that global journey feel so personal, so tied back to the village.
It does. It shows that even in the Brazilian forest, their social world was still Pünderich. Now, the North American experience was just as dramatic.
This is the letter from 1858.
Right. And it recounts this terrifying train journey across the U.S. The train was speeding over these immense ravines on wooden bridges, 70 or 80 feet high.
The construction must have seemed impossibly flimsy.
It did. The letter says the passengers were so scared they were ready to jump from the train if it derailed.
Just an incredible image of the risk involved in accessing the American West.
And when the writer arrived, he found work, but also immediately ran into the economic and social tensions of the time.
The labor market.
He got a job as a kitchen worker in Alameda, started at $15 a month. But he immediately began complaining about the Chinese workers.
And the language he uses in the letter is shocking.
It is. He says they worked for a few cents and would eat nothing but rats and mice. It's this vicious racist trope.
And our role here is just to report what's in the source material, not to endorse it. It's a reflection of the acute economic anxiety and the overt racism that European immigrants were experiencing and participating in.
Exactly. The tensions were sharp and immediate. But this brings us full circle, back to the core theme. Despite all that hardship, despite the success, some found abroad.
Some came back.
Some chose to return. That decision is really the emotional core of Pünderich's identity. The family of Caspar Reis and Anna Maria Nalen returned from Brazil.
And that act, it symbolizes that for some, the roots in the Moselle Valley were just stronger than any promise of a distant paradise.
They chose home. They chose the known struggle with their community over a foreign possibility.
Which brings us to our final and most contemporary theme. How do you secure this incredible rich, and often traumatic history for the future.
This is where the physical past meets the digital future. The role of the chronicler becomes absolutely essential.
Embodied by Winfried Schneiders.
Yes. His work in creating the Chronicle and the Family Book, which runs right up to 2024, is about securing 3 centuries of memory in an accessible digital format.
And what does that raw material look like? It's more than just a list of names and dates.
Oh, much more. It's the collection of photos, genealogical data, and crucially, the Totenzettel.
The death notice.
And these small printed cards are so rich, they don't just announce a death, they capture a life. They mention civic roles, fire chief, council member, and often include a personal quote or a poem.
They turn abstract history into concrete, relatable human stories.
Exactly. The synthesis of all this material turns rumor and fading oral tradition into documented, verifiable history. It is the foundation of what you could call the digital village.
And the chronicler himself is the link. We know it was Winfried Schneiders who took that photo of the old Ike House building in 2004.
That simple act connects the 19th century infrastructure of commercial trust directly to the digital archive of today.
And we see that continuity in the civic roles documented in the family book. People like Matthias Peters II, a wine grower and fire chief who died in 81, or Paul Reitz, also a vintner and fire chief, died in 93.
It shows the persistence of certain families taking on these vital unpaid leadership roles generation after generation.
And what about the cultural practices? How did they adapt to the modern world?
The tradition of the Kali Mittwoch, or Cellar Wednesday, is a perfect example. This was the day citizens gathered to taste the new vintage, barrel by barrel.
A tradition that could apparently last for days. They'd get stuck in the cellar.
A delightful form of civic engagement. But that religious holiday was eventually abolished.
And did the tradition just die with it?
Not at all. This is resilience in action. They just moved the communal wine tasting to a weekend. The core function remains, even if the schedule changes. The tradition was potent enough to demand adaptation, not extinction.
We should also mention the importance of local tradespeople. That detail from World War I is incredible.
It's so powerful. The mechanic, M. Engel, was recalled from military service in 1917. Not to build weapons, but to go home and repair agricultural machinery.
His hands-on local knowledge was deemed more vital to the war effort than his presence on the front line.
It completely elevates the importance of practical, local expertise.
Which brings us to the final, ultimate symbol of Pünderich's perspective on itself. The Prinzenkopf Tower.
It really is the epic conclusion of their physical history. The original tower from 1899 was described as absolutely solid and bomb-proof.
But it wasn't.
No. Because of the strategic railway bridge behind it, it became a target for Allied bombers in World War II.
And it was destroyed.
The German troops started dismantling it, but in March 1945, American forces shelled it and blew it up right down to its foundation. For decades, Pünderich lost that physical perspective, its iconic overlook.
And it took a long, long time to get it back.
The desire was there, but the money wasn't. They had a plan for an expensive stone tower in 1968, but it was rejected. They had to wait another 12 years.
Until 1980. And the way it was finally rebuilt perfectly symbolizes that communal spirit.
It really does. It was a simpler wooden design, but it was a shared cross-community effort. Pünderich provided the wood. The neighboring community of Als paid the construction costs. Other villages and the regional government chipped in.
So it wasn't one village acting alone. It was a regional effort to restore a shared viewpoint.
A cherished perspective, destroyed by global conflict, requiring decades of persistent, collaborative organization to finally restore. It's the perfect symbol.
And that persistent collective organization is really the definitive finding here, isn't it? Pünderich's resilience isn't luck.
It's built on a deep history of organizing. Whether it's a singing club in 1863, the massive Flurbereinigung in the 1950s, or the digital preservation efforts by families like the Schneiders today.
So what we've seen is a community that consistently tackles these huge external threats, ice flows, war, economic hardship, by organizing and adapting. From barrel calibration to digital archiving, the method is the same.
Collective effort secures the future. And it's a powerful validation of rootedness. While some left, the vitality of Pünderich today rests on the families who stayed, who chose to rebuild and professionalize their life on the river.
So as the digital archives secure the past, and the new Prinzenkopf Tower offers this fresh perspective on the present, we're left with a final question for you, the learner. How does a community ensure that the living traditions, the music, the wine tasting, the generational transfer of knowledge, remain potent enough to carry the weight of that digital legacy forward?
And maybe I'll add one more thought. We've established that the Moselle's power is timeless. If the digital village is now safe on a hard drive, thanks to the work of the chronicler, what happens when the next wave hits? Whether it's environmental or social, it will demand an adaptability that only the physical, resilient, collective effort of the community on the ground, carrying the memory of that slate, those barrels, and those long journeys, can truly provide. The living social contract is the only real firewall.